Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own Her Song is a Sin, or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by Lu1, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by me, Brit. Her Song is a Sin. Chapter 1. The gunshot sounded a deafening boom magnified by the concrete walls of the parking garage. Raelle Culler drew her gun and returned fire in the direction of the source of the blast, her own shot echoing in the night. Her eyes darted to the man beside her, her client. Senator Tony Johnson just stood there. His head jerked this way and that, his normally elegant gray ponytail limp with strands of silver hair hanging in his face. It was obvious that his sense of self-preservation had fled him. The senator didn't know what hit him, as Raelle roughly grabbed him by his shoulder and pulled him around the SUV where she wanted him to hide. Another shot boomed just as she pushed him to the ground where the engine block of the SUV would provide the best cover. He looked up at her, eyes wide with fear. He started to speak, but stopped when Raelle put a slender finger to her lips and shook her head. "Stay here," Raelle hissed. The senator nodded his head in response, and Raelle eased her arm off of the older man and crouched down beside him. Her head tilted toward the sound of running feet from the other end of the garage. Seeing every detail of the parking garage clearly in her mind, Raelle judged by the trajectory of the shots that the shooter had come near the stairwell leading pedestrians up or down the next level of the garage. She crept slowly to the other side of the SUV, her weapon an extension of her arm. A silver Lexus blocked the view to her right. Cautiously, she moved to the end of the car for a better look. The parking garage was dimly lit, and every few feet lights illuminated the cavernous space. Raelle's pale blue eyes focused on the darkness ahead, searching for signs of movement. Nothing. Just as soon as she decided that the killer was going to give it up for now and try again later, more shots rang out. With a crack, the rear windshield of the Lexus shattered, and glass rained down on Raelle, tiny shards bouncing off her black suit jacket. Raelle backpedaled quickly, her heel catching on a wheel stop. As she fell back onto the ground, she fired in the direction of the shots and heard the loud thud of a body coming into contact with a solid object. After a few minutes of silence, Raelle struggled to her feet, wincing. She edged around the vehicles and moved towards the still form laying against one of the concrete walls. She nudged it with her boot. No movement. Reaching down, she turned the body over. Blood oozed from a hole in the shooter's head. Raelle allowed herself a small smirk. She might be a bit clumsy, but that was still a damn good shot. She holstered her weapon and grabbed a cell phone from her belt. Her job was done. The next evening, Raelle watched as the senator poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter. Politely, she averted her gaze away from the older men, eyes roaming around the library in the senator's home, pretending not to notice as much of the dark liquid sloshed out of the glass as his hand shook. Not everyone was conditioned to handle being shot at and hunted like some sort of animal. Raelle felt his reaction was perfectly normal. "Thank you for saving my life, Miss Culler." Senator Johnson put the decanter down and lifted a glass to her in a mock salute. He offered her a glass, but she declined with a slight shake of her head. "It was my job, Senator." The older man nodded, recognizing the past tense for what it was. He had already noticed earlier that afternoon that the girl's belongings were no longer in the guest room she'd occupied during her duties. The ex-military officer had agreed to serve him only as long as a threat to his life existed. The hired assassin had been eliminated. Rael's job was done, and the contract had been satisfied. "I'd like it if you'd stay on. Won't you reconsider?" He offered his best grandfather smile at the blonde leaning against the wall in his library. He could tell that she was struggling to keep her weight off her ankle. She was slender and so young, but carried a fierce and determined expression on her face. "No, Senator, we had an agreement," Rael answered firmly. She picked up her suit jacket from the leather chair that she'd slung it over when she'd entered the room. She had only stopped by to tell the senator about the police's findings from the evidence gathered from the assassin's vehicle. That final report made, she put her jacket on and stepped away from the wall. "If it's a question of money," the senator began, but stopped at a sharp look from the blonde. "No, Senator Johnson, it's not about the money. I don't care about the money. I just don't like to stay too long in one place. If I get comfortable, my feet tend to fall asleep. Besides, you should be safe now. You have your regular security detail." Rael jerked her head towards the door, where the government-sanctioned security stood, in the form of two ridiculously solemn men in seriously boring black suits. She offered a reassuring smile to the senator. "You'll be fine." The senator frowned, regretting his inability to sway the girl. After a moment, he shrugged and offered his hand. "I'll have the rest of your fees wired to your account, and I'll be sure to add in a bonus for your unexpected medical expenses." Rael accepted the gesture and firmly shook the senator's hand. "Thank you, Senator Johnson, but what we agreed upon will be fine." "Tony," the senator corrected. "You saved my life. You can certainly call me Tony." If the girl was really going to walk away from a permanent position, she could at least drop the formality she'd insisted on maintaining during the employment. After a moment of silence, Rael smiled. "Thank you, Tony." The senator nodded his approval. Taking it as a sign that she was dismissed, Rael turned on her heel and marched from the room as best as she could with her ankle still smarting from the previous night events. Josh Talbert needed to take a piss. Unfortunately for him, leaving the limo to relieve himself wasn't something he was allowed to do per company policy. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat and removed his hat. He was having a shitty day. Not surprisingly, it started as most shitty days do, when he woke up over an hour late for work. When he did leave the comforting bliss of unconsciousness, it wasn't the sound of his alarm clock that interrupted his sleep, but the noise of his wife's screams. Josh, still groggy from his interrupted slumber, could not make out his wife's words, but he could guess what had happened. He knew that letting their son have a dog was a bad idea, but Tommy had begged him into the state of insanity, and so now, as a teething puppy, Paws had torn through another pair of his wife's designer heels. Heels which they could not afford in the first place on his meager earnings as a limo driver. Ignoring his wife, he got ready as quickly and quietly as he could, and walked out of the door, forgetting his favorite thermos with its morning jolt of caffeine. At work, his ears received no respite as his boss reamed him out for being late. As punishment, he was assigned the one client that no chauffeur at the limo agency wanted. He usually enjoyed his job driving around the rich and famous. He had even been able to earn a few cool dad points with Tommy and his friends by getting the occasional actor's autograph. But no one enjoyed driving around the young musician Ramshorn. Cursing his luck, he at least tried to get a cup of coffee from the machine in the staff lounge, but it was apparently on the fritz again, and so he was forced to grab a bottle of water instead. Water ran right through him. Now, after hours of driving the spoiled 20-something and her brother around with no respite, he was again waiting in front of one of the lesser-known fashion stores in Massachusetts. He glanced towards the shop windows, hoping to see some sign of the brunette or her fruity brother, but he really couldn't see inside the store from the sun reflecting off its large glass panes. His eyes wandered to the next store over, a small cafe, and with a grunt he made his decision. He wasn't going to suffer any longer. If the snooty girl and her brother came back while he was gone, she would just have to wait by the limo or go back inside the shop. If she bitched to the limo company, well, how much worse could his day really get? Maybe he'd get lucky and she'd specifically request he no longer be her driver. Josh stepped out of the limo, locked the doors with his key fob, and trotted across the street and into the cafe. Ignoring the customers only sign on the bathroom door, he entered and quickly did his business. Finally relieved, he washed his hands and stepped back into the shop. There he found himself tempted by the heavily scent of coffee that he'd missed earlier that morning. He looked out the shop front but couldn't see anyone near the limo, so he joined the short line to buy a cup of coffee. Maybe he'd even be nice and get the brunette and her brother one. After all, Ramshorn might be a bitch. But her brother had always been courteous to him and apologetic for the brunette's behavior. Byron, Josh thought, remembering the name. Much later than he would have liked because the barista was obviously new and kept making mistakes, Josh exited the cafe with his drink caddy and started to cross the street, only to see the young star and her brother not only standing out by the limo, but animatedly pointing at something. With a groan, the driver realized what had their attention. The tires on the limo were slashed. Ramshorn noticed him in that moment and started yelling at him. He felt the caddy slip from his hand and the coffee spill on the street. Yeah, apparently, his day could get a hell of a lot worse. Between Josh's newfound fear of unemployment and the brunette's yelling at the stupidity of the driver, neither of them noticed when Byron plucked something from the windshield and tucked it in his suit jacket. Raelle relaxed in her soft brown leather recliner. She watched the fire dance in the fireplace and listened to the slow twang of 80s country music. It didn't matter that it was hot as hell outside, with the end of summer still holding on strong. Raelle enjoyed the heat, and she loved having a fire lit. After the job with the senator, it was nice to take some time off. She'd have to take on another client soon, but she could at least allow herself another week, maybe 2, before calling up those who had expressed interest in her services, thanks to the bonus that the senator had wired her. She picked up the tumbler resting on the table beside her and took a slow sip of the whiskey. Moments later, the sound of the doorbell interrupted her from her relaxation. With a sigh, she put down the drink she was still nursing. She stood there for a second, making sure she was steady on her feet, and made her way to the front door. She walked slowly, mindful of her ankle, which was still smarted some, even after taking it easy for 2 weeks. As soon as Raelle opened the door to the older woman standing on her porch, she regretted it. "Miss Caller, I'm here to speak to you again about Scylla Ramshorn." Raelle was already moving to shut the door, for once not caring about the importance of maintaining her southern charm, when Scylla Ramshorn's manager put her hand out to stop it. "Please, hear me out. Just 10 minutes of your time." Shaking her head, "Miss Isadora, remember? Just Isadora." The woman smiled, but left her hand where it was. She wasn't going to leave until the blonde at least listened to her proposal. The consequences of her failure were too high. "Isadora," Raelle responded, "as I told you on the phone, I don't take on celebrity clients. Miss Caller, Scylla's a young and very frightened lady. She lost her parents years ago, and all she really has in the way of support is her brother. She's much more than just a celebrity. Your presence and expertise would go a long way in making her feel safe. Please, Miss Caller," the woman pleaded, moving her body closer into the doorway. Raelle sighed, stepping back from the doorway enough to let Isadora inside her home. She still planned to say no, but she could at least look at her contacts and offer the woman an alternative. She had a few military pals who had recently left the service, and one of them might jump at the chance for private work. "I won't take the job, Isadora. But if you'll wait here a minute, I'll grab my phone and maybe I can give you some names and numbers of someone who might want to help." "You turn it down even if I told you the job is $5,000 a week plus expenses and private guest house?" Blue eyes widened at the figures she'd just heard, and Raelle faltered. "For that kind of money, you could get someone who's done this a lot longer than me, and has had way more experience. Scylla isn't going to agree to some person my age or older tagging along with her everywhere she goes. She has a certain reputation she wishes to retain. You would be able to blend in with her crew. Besides, I've already vetted you thoroughly. Your last employer, Senator Johnson, has assured me that you are nothing but professional despite your limited time in the private sector, and you came highly recommended by your former commanding officer, Anacostia Quatermain." Raelle couldn't believe the audacity of the lady to vet her even after she had said no to the job. Still, if Anacostia Quatermain had recommended her, she was reluctant to let the woman down. Anacostia had really helped her to become the soldier she had been. Then, when Raelle's mom, Willa, died during a combat strike gone wrong, Anacostia had understood why she had made the decision to leave the military after her tour of duty ended. After her discharge, Raelle had spent nearly a year holed up at her father's house in the session, refusing to even speak about anything remotely military-related, and she ignored the few friends she had made during the time in her service. Anacostia had been there for her then too, literally showing up at the Kala residence. She'd practically frog-marched Raelle out the door and back into the world of the living. Her old commander had really helped her get her head back into the game. She'd even helped Raelle get established in private work. Yeah, Anacostia supported her without question, and she didn't want to say no if it might look bad on her former commanding officer. "I seriously doubt I'll fit in with Miss Ramshorn's, what did you call it, crew?" Raelle awkwardly gestured at herself, unsure of her ability to blend in as needed for the job. "I mean, I'm not really what you call star material." The older woman hid a smirk as she took in the blonde's appearance. She was tall and slender, with her one side of her hair braided and the other side loose down to her neck. She wore faded old jeans that were probably as old as she was, and had on a long-sleeved pink plaid shirt. Isadora was quite sure she had seen Scylla in a similar state of dress before she'd left the mansion, a yellow plaid blazer, if her memory served her correctly. "Oh, I think you'll fit in just fine. Scylla has insisted that I hire you." Raelle sighed again. She realized Isadora wasn't going to give up. "Maybe I can come by the house and look at the situation, meet Miss Ramshorn, but if I take the job, I want 6,000. She had told the senator that she didn't care about money, but that wasn't exactly the truth. She'd bought the house with her part of her mom's life insurance that she had received when Willa died, but she hadn't made that much in the army, and she'd yet to have many private clients with very deep pockets. The senator's pay and his bonus had been generous, but she still had bills, and she could use the extra money to help her dad now that his health was starting to interfere with his work. Isadora clapped her hands together and beamed at the blonde. 6,000 it is. Why don't you come by tomorrow around 3 and you can meet Scylla then?" Raelle nodded, practically chasing the woman back to the door to hold it open for her. Her southern charm returned. After Isadora left, she closed the door, leaned against it, and groaned. Just what had she gotten herself into? Hours after Isadora had made her exit, Raelle was still considering calling the woman back and canceling the meeting for the next day. She'd spent some time trying to research the musician and had read what some of the tabloids wrote about the young star. There really wasn't any biographies from reliable sources, rather mostly conjecture and rumor. One thing that did consistently stand out, though, was that Scylla Ramshorn was considered snooty and a bit of a bitch. Raelle sighed and picked up her phone. She was just about to click on Isadora's number when it vibrated in her hand and the screen changed from her call list to the photo of a bubbly redhead wearing combat gear and dancing in a desert. Raelle answered with a grin. "How you doing, Tally?" After a few minutes of catching up on what her best friend in the army had been doing since discharge, Raelle told her about her recent jobs and the newest offer. "Scylla Ramshorn?" Tally Graven squealed through the phone. "Oh, Ray, she's a goddess." Raelle chuckled at her best friend's exclamation. "Careful, Tell. If I didn't know any better, I'd say you have a crush. You know how they say there's that one girl you'd go gay for? Yeah, I'd go gay for her," Tally admitted. "I guess," Raelle answered. Her brow furrowed as she looked at an image of the star on her iPad. She was beautiful, Ray admitted to herself. Soft brunette hair, eyes a shade of blue that surely had to be electronically altered for the photo. No one had eyes that blue. She was looking right into the camera, a soft smirk on her face like she was sharing a secret. "She's a siren, Ray," Tally said, interrupting Raelle's thoughts of the very same thing. "Yup, she's a little too much, don't you think? I mean, I've looked at some of the tabloid stuff. She doesn't seem to care too much about letting it all hang out. Rael's eyes dropped back to the plunging cleavage the photo revealed. Well, I don't know. I heard she's actually very private. Everyone knows that her parents died years ago, but it's all really hush-hush. Next to no one really knows anything about her personal life. If she's not on tour, she's holed up in that big mansion she owns. Most people don't even know if she's gay or straight. I don't really care, Rael said, turning her iPad off. I just don't know if I should take the job or not. Oh, Ray, you have to. The money would really help you and your dad, and you could help her. Maybe, Rael said finally. I guess I'll at least go check it out. Check her out, you mean, Tally teased. No, Tell. Check the job out. Sexy siren or not, Rael was not going to let her mind go there. She was a lady and a professional, after all. Sure. Tired of the teasing, Rael changed the subject to their old army buddies. Tally, who always seemed to be in the know, happily obliged by filling Rael in on all that she had missed, and they chatted long into the night. So then Bellwether knocks him right off the side of the boat and tells him he can swim back to shore or get kicked out of basic. What did his unit do? Rael asked. Well, you know how we were, Ray. Unity. Tally answered. They all jumped in right after him. Rael laughed, just imagining some poor new recruit and his unit jumping in the North River at Abigail's commands. Glancing up at the fireplace she'd lit hours before, she noticed that it had burned down to embers. Okay, Tally. If I'm going to go face the Scylla the Siren tomorrow, I'm going to have to call it a night. I'll talk to you in a few days. Hey, Ray, Tally asked, before Rael could end the call. At least get her autograph for me? Rael smiled. I'll see what I can do. Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own, and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.